The criminal legal system in the United States does not fail in a vacuum. It fails predictably, repetitively, and structurally often in ways that are entirely preventable. When law enforcement officers deviate from the truth, whether by fabrication, omission, or silence, they do so within systems that tolerate, enable, or even reward that behavior. Understanding these systemic vulnerabilities is critical to achieving meaningful reform. It is not enough to punish individual misconduct. We must dismantle the structures that incubate dishonesty and replace them with systems that demand, reward, and institutionalize candor. This chapter explores the interlocking components that contribute to systemic vulnerability: institutional pressures and incentives, the lack of accountability and transparency, and the entrenched cultural norms that shape how officers are trained, supervised, and judged. Each vulnerability is examined not as an isolated defect, but as part of a broader architecture of failure and ecosystem in which truth-telling becomes optional rather than mandatory. Institutional pressures and incentives. The performance metrics problem. Police departments, like most public institutions, rely on metrics to evaluate performance. These metrics include arrests made, cases cleared, contraband seized, citations issued, and convictions secured. While ostensibly objective, these measures can distort incentives in profound ways. Officers may feel pressure to meet quotas, implicit or explicit, and thus prioritize volume over validity. Commanders may push for higher clearance rates, even if it means cutting corners or reclassifying unsolved cases as resolved. In such an environment, truth becomes subordinate to outcomes. An officer who closes a case by securing a confession regardless of how it was obtained is often celebrated more than the officer who follows protocol but fails to make an arrest. Supervisors may turn a blind eye to exaggerations or inconsistencies in reports if the results enhance the department's statistics. The result is an institutional bias in favor of performance over process. Officers may learn early in their careers that bending the truth is not only tolerated but rewarded, so long as it produces desirable outcomes. This distorts the moral compass of policing and undermines the foundational role of truth and justice. Prosecutorial pressures. The same dynamic applies in prosecutorial offices, where attorneys are often evaluated based on conviction rates. Prosecutors who win cases are promoted. Those who lose too many may be sidelined. This creates a dangerous dependency on police officers whose testimony may not be reliable, but who are perceived as closers. In such relationships, prosecutors may be reluctant to scrutinize the conduct of the officers they work with. They may overlook questionable reports or fail to disclose impeachment evidence that could damage their case. This professional entanglement erodes the adversarial safeguards meant to protect the innocent and invites systemic abuse. Lack of accountability and transparency. Inadequate internal oversight. Most police departments have internal affairs divisions charged with investigating misconduct. However, in many jurisdictions, these divisions are understaffed, under-resourced, and lack true independence. Investigations are often handled by peers of the accused officer, creating conflicts of interest and diminishing public confidence in the process. Worse, many complaints are never formally investigated. Departments may classify misconduct as unsubstantiated, without adequate inquiry, or dismiss allegations that don't meet a high threshold of proof. Officers with repeated complaints may remain on the force for years without disciplinary action, protected by weak oversight structures and union agreements that favor secrecy over accountability. Secrecy in disciplinary records. In many states, law enforcement disciplinary records are shielded from public disclosure. These records are often sealed, expunged, or withheld under the guise of privacy, security, or union contract protections. As a result, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the public may have no access to prior findings of dishonesty or misconduct. This lack of transparency creates a dual injustice. It hides patterns of abuse from those who might hold officers accountable and deprives defendants of material impeachment evidence they are constitutionally entitled to receive. A legal system that allows secret disciplinary histories is one that invites repeated misconduct and undermines due process. Weak decertification mechanisms. In most professions, misconduct can lead to loss of licensure. Yet in many states, decertification of police officers is rare and difficult. Officers who are fired for misconduct in one jurisdiction can often find employment in another without the new agency knowing their full history, a phenomenon sometimes called the wandering officer problem. Even where decertification boards exist, they are often slow, procedurally limited, or influenced by political pressure. Without a national database or a mandatory reporting requirement, officers with documented credibility issues can continue to work, carry weapons, and testify in court as if their past had never happened. Cultural issues within police departments. The blue wall of silence. The most well-known cultural barrier to truth in law enforcement is the so-called blue wall of silence, an informal but powerful code among officers not to report misconduct by their peers. This unwritten rule is enforced through peer pressure, ostracism, intimidation, and even retaliation. Officers who speak out may find themselves reassigned, denied backup, or targeted for scrutiny. This culture makes it nearly impossible for ethical officers to report dishonesty without personal risk. It also ensures that misconduct remains hidden until exposed by external forces, civil litigation, public scandals, or investigative journalism. The blue wall of silence is not just an obstacle to accountability, it is a direct threat to the principle of candor that the justice system relies upon. Us versus them mentality. Another cultural vulnerability is the adversarial mindset that pits officers against the public, particularly communities of color, protesters, and those perceived as anti-police. In such an environment, truth can be seen as expendable in the service of a greater mission, preserving order, protecting comrades, or winning against a hostile public. This mentality encourages tribalism over transparency. Officers are less likely to admit mistakes, disclose misconduct, or provide exculpatory information when they see themselves as warriors rather than public servants. It is in this context that dishonesty is not only rationalized but valorized, especially when it protects the department or the mission. Leadership by indifference. Cultural norms are often shaped from the top. When department leaders fail to prioritize ethics, overlook misconduct, or reward problematic behavior, the message to rank-and-file officers is unmistakable. Leaders who tolerate dishonesty even passively foster a culture where truth is treated as negotiable. True reform begins with leadership that models accountability, enforces ethical standards, and protects whistleblowers. Without this, even the best policies will fail, as they are subverted by a culture that resists transparency at every turn. Structural deficiencies in the legal framework. Giglio and Brady failures. As discussed in previous chapters, the Supreme Court's decisions in Brady v. Maryland and Giglio v. United States establish constitutional obligations to disclose exculpatory and impeachment evidence. Yet across the country, these doctrines are inconsistently applied and often ignored. Some prosecutors fail to create or maintain Giglio lists of officers with known credibility issues. Others rely on police departments to self-report, a practice that is both unreliable and insufficient. Defense attorneys may not receive disclosure until the eve of trial, or not at all. Courts rarely enforce compliance with meaningful consequences. The structural weakness of these mandates allows dishonesty to fester. A system that relies on voluntary disclosure and subjective standards cannot protect the rights of the accused. It must be replaced with mandatory, automatic mechanisms that track and reveal credibility concerns in real time. Arbitration and union protections. Police unions play a powerful role in shaping systemic vulnerabilities. Through collective bargaining agreements, unions have secured grievance procedures that make it difficult to discipline or fire officers even for proven dishonesty. Arbitration panels may overturn terminations, reinstate officers with back pay, or reduce penalties based on procedural technicalities. While collective bargaining rights are essential in any labor context, the protections afforded to officers often exceed those of any other profession. These protections create a shield around dishonesty and undermine the public's ability to demand accountability. Reform must include a rebalancing of these powers to ensure that candor violations are treated with the seriousness they deserve. Political and media dynamics. Politicization of law enforcement. Law enforcement agencies do not operate in a vacuum. They are influenced by political leaders, interest groups, and electoral cycles. In some cases, political pressure can stifle accountability efforts or encourage more aggressive tactics that blur ethical lines. Sheriffs, for example, are often elected officials who must navigate both law enforcement responsibilities and political constituencies. This dual role can create incentives to suppress damaging information, retaliate against critics, or delay investigations until after an election. In such environments, truth becomes a political liability rather than a public value. Media control and narrative framing. Public understanding of law enforcement conduct is heavily mediated by news reports, press releases, and official statements. Departments often control the narrative by releasing carefully worded accounts, withholding footage, or framing incidents to minimize perceived wrongdoing. This control over narrative delays accountability and skews public perception. When the truth does emerge through leaks, lawsuits, or video evidence, it is often too late to reverse the initial damage. A more transparent media strategy, with full access to records and independent oversight of communications, is essential for countering this vulnerability. The impact of systemic vulnerabilities on defendants. For individuals caught in the system, these vulnerabilities mean a higher risk of wrongful arrest, unfair prosecution, and unjust conviction. When the structures designed to enforce truth are themselves compromised, defendants stand little chance of prevailing against false or incomplete narratives. On officers, systemic vulnerabilities also harm good officers. Those who wish to act with integrity are punished by a system that tolerates dishonesty. They face retaliation, professional stagnation, or moral injury. Without institutional support, even the most ethical officers may become complicit or leave the profession altogether. On the public. Finally, the public suffers from diminished trust, broken communities, and a system that appears arbitrary or corrupt. When people no longer believe that the system tells the truth, they stop cooperating with investigations, decline to serve as jurors, and disengage from civic life. This erosion of trust is one of the greatest costs of systemic vulnerability and one of the hardest to repair. Conclusion. The vulnerabilities described in this chapter are not new. They have existed for decades, sustained by inertia, institutional loyalty, and a cultural resistance to change. But they are not inevitable. Each one represents a choice to prioritize stability over integrity, loyalty over truth, or performance over justice. If we are to build a system where candor is the rule rather than the exception, we must confront these vulnerabilities head-on. This means redesigning performance metrics, enforcing transparency, reforming legal structures, and cultivating a culture that values truth above all. Only then can we ensure that the first duty of every officer to tell the truth becomes not just a slogan, but a lived reality. I am a dedicated author and researcher specializing in the intricate nexus of technology, law, and government. My extensive body of work includes a diverse array of books, scholarly articles, and policy papers that delve into the evolving challenges and opportunities presented by technological advancements within legal and governmental contexts. Through rigorous analysis and insightful exploration, I examine how emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, data privacy, and blockchain shape and are shaped by legislative frameworks, regulatory practices, and public policy initiatives. My publications aim to bridge the gap between technical innovation and legal governance, providing comprehensive resources for policymakers, legal professionals, technologists, and academics alike. By addressing critical issues like digital rights, cyber law, technology-driven governance, and the ethical implications of technological integration, my work contributes to the development of informed and adaptive legal systems capable of responding to rapid technological change. I am committed to fostering a deeper understanding of how technology influences governmental operations and legal standards, and vice versa, thereby promoting the creation of robust, equitable, and forward-thinking policies. In addition to my writing, I actively engage with government agencies, legal institutions, and technology firms to offer expertise and collaborate on initiatives that ensure the responsible and effective implementation of technology in public spheres. My dedication to exploring and elucidating the intersections of technology, law, and government underscores my commitment to advancing knowledge and facilitating informed decision-making in an increasingly digitalized world.